Sorry for the delay. No, I didn't forget. I just got caught up with some other stuff, so it's about time I finish up some old business. Let's keep talking about the 2013 NFL Draft and take a look at a division in the NFC South where I could potentially argue for any of the four teams in the division to be a legit, at least playoff contender in 2013. When you look at the Atlanta Falcons in their 2012 season, you say they were this close to making it to the Super Bowl. And in theory, you're right, but this was a team that I think had far more holes than maybe some Atlanta Falcon fans or members of the organization would necessarily want to believe or want to admit. That doesn't mean that they were a bad team or that they were a fluke. The bottom line is the Atlanta Falcons got where they deserved last year in terms of getting to the NFC Championship game, getting that close to the Super Bowl. I mean, they were a good team. They were a damn good team. They just happened to run into a team that had a little bit more of that mojo, if you will, in the San Francisco 49ers. But beyond question, I think most people would agree that the majority of the Falcons' needs were on the defensive side of the ball. And I do agree with that. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that when you're a team like Atlanta that you automatically go into the draft and say, hey, no matter what, we have to take defense, 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 and that's it. Because they do have some question marks still, I believe, on the offensive side of the football. And you have to be able to play the draft game and say, hey, we could take this defensive player who fills a position of need, but this guy is 2 times the fucking player, and we didn't expect him to be there, and we'll find a way to make him work. And that's what good teams do. Now, what did work out well, I believe, for the Atlanta Falcons is the fact that they were able to find that common ground between looking for players that address needs and also getting players that were really good value. I really like the way that Thomas Dmitroff stayed patient. There were a lot of reports going out before the draft talking about Dmitroff was trying to potentially move up into the top 5 or the top 10 to maybe get Dee Milner out of Alabama. I thought if he did that, that would have been a stupid move. There was no Julio Jones in this particular draft that was worth necessitating that much of a trade-up. So he stayed patient. They did the right thing as an organization. They sit there and they wait, and all of a sudden they're able to trade up. They don't have to trade up 15, 20 spots. They have to trade up, 8 spots, I think, to 22 overall. And you end up getting Desmond Trufant. I mean, that's how good teams do things. They identify a player they want. They say, if he gets to a certain point and we're afraid he's not going to drop any farther, then we'll jump up and take him, but we're not going to sit there and go above and beyond and get nuts with this. I really like the fact as well, not only did they take who I feel is a very good corner in Desmond Trufant in the first round, getting Robert Alford in the tail end of the second round, that was pretty good value there as well. And they had a couple of 4th-round picks, and Malliciah Goodman and Levine Toilolo. If I said his name right or wrong, I'm not sure. I don't care. But the big fucking tight end from Stanford and the defensive end Goodman from Clemson. And even Maponga from TCU. I like Maponga. I had somebody that I talked to on Facebook occasionally kind of turned me on to Maponga, to be honest with you. Hadn't paid a lot of attention to him. Watched him a couple times. I saw a guy, I'm like, hey, this guy could be a nice situational pass rusher. Maybe even a 3-4 outside linebacker. When you look at Goodman and Toilolo, these are 2 guys that could potentially be big bust, I believe, in that they don't adapt to the NFL game and they don't really fit in a role-playing type of role, or they're guys that could potentially contribute even as rookies. And I mean that, potentially even as rookies, especially in the case of Goodman, because God knows, even though the Falcons have attempted a little bit to address the defensive line in free agency, it's still not a great defensive line by any stretch of the imagination. So a kid with talent like Goodman, if he comes in and impresses from day one, he could end up being a starter. It was a solid draft for the Atlanta Falcons. I give it a grade of like a B or a B-, and that's not a bad thing at all. They didn't really do much to hurt themselves at all in this draft, and in fact, they helped themselves quite a bit. The Carolina Panthers are one of those teams that when you look at what happened in 2012, frankly, they were a little disappointing. Maybe we got a little too much of the Cam Newton bandwagon, maybe not. Maybe it was just the fact that they just started off like complete shit, and it's hard to recover from that. But they finished the year off very strong. So they're a team you look at on one hand and you say, they disappointed me in 2012, but the way they finished maybe suggests to you that this is a team that is in position to make a big move in 2013. And when I see the Carolina Panthers, I see a team that could potentially do that, be a playoff contender. The Panthers got lucky here. And I don't mean lucky in a bad way necessarily. They just got lucky. And in a lot of ways, this is an organization, when you look back at the Carolina Panthers and their history in the first round, during their existence. They've hit more often than they've missed. Some of the hits have been smaller than some of the others. Some of the hits have been very huge. But the bottom line is the Carolina Panthers in general draft relatively well in the first round. They really do. It's just they end up missing in some of the other critical rounds, in particular the second and third round. Do I need to remind you guys, if you're a Panther fan, of people like Dwayne Jarrett? Do I really need to? Just saying. Armonte Edwards? All right, you got my point. But to be able to get Star Lotulelei at the 14th pick, it's a perfect combination of getting great value. It just fell into your lap. You didn't have to do any fucking thing. And fills your number one position of need on the defensive side of the ball, which is your defensive tackle. Now, that was a great move. You know, kudos to Ron Rivera and that front office for not overthinking it and saying, hey, Lotulelei's there at 14. Let's fucking take him. Some people may be a little surprised that they doubled up in round 2 by taking Kwan Short. Maybe they would have taken a guy like Keenan Allen. Maybe they would have taken, yes, I'll say it, even a running back, or they would have addressed another position. Maybe corner especially, which seemed to be a glaring weakness, the secondary in general heading into this draft. But, you know, as a Bear fan, I remember when Jerry Angelo, in one of the few drafts he did get right at all, 2004, when he took Tommy Harris in round 1 and he doubled up with Tank Johnson in round number 2. It ended up being the foundation of that 2016 that went to the Super Bowl. Now, some of you might say, well, the Bucs tried that a few years ago with Gerald McCoy and Brian Price. Yeah, it didn't work out so much, but I get the philosophy. It was good value again, Short right there in the middle of round 2. Fills a big position of need. There were better players on the board in my opinion, but I'm not going to berate this team for the pick. I love the pick of Barner for them in round 6, a guy who could contribute maybe in the return game and special teams as a rookie, could come in and fill that role that Mike Goodson used to fill. As far as the Panthers draft, with only having 5 picks, they weren't going to be able to do a ton to make their team better immediately from day number 1. But I love the pick of Lotulelei for them. I think Short could come in and contribute at least as a, you know, a sub-package guy as a rookie. It was a C-plus draft. Maybe they could have done a little bit better, but shit, they could have done a whole hell of a lot worse. Although I have a feeling I know a couple of Panther fans that will question the picks of Short and Kabila for probably a number of years. When you look at the New Orleans Saints, they're a team that heading into 2013 could do one of 2 things. And I believe I even mentioned this in the 2012 season recap for this team, is that you have Drew Brees, so you always have a chance to contend. But their past couple of drafts have been, and when you don't draft well, it puts that much more pressure on the players you already do have there. It makes it much more likely that you're going to see a decline. And when you look at the New Orleans Saints, to me, they're the team in that division that looks like they are primed for a decline. So it was very important that they drafted well. Now, of course, they didn't have the second-round pick because of Bountygate. They did have the benefit of 2 third-round picks, that's true. But in general, they were going to have to make sure the few picks that they have, unless they were going to get really creative and be able to do all these magical, wonderful things, they were going to have to be able to focus on getting good players at positions of need at every pick on the board. And I give the Saints a lot of credit. They did that, getting Vaccaro at pick 15. Maybe, to be fair, maybe they will regret at some point with switching to the 3-4 defense. Maybe they will regret not taking a Jarvis Jones. They just might. But Vaccaro is a good player and definitely fills a void in their secondary and a void on their football team, especially their defensive football team, because their defense was atrocious last year. Now, another thing that was atrocious, frankly, for the Saints in 2012 was their offensive line, in particular the tackles, in particular the left tackle. Of course, the Bears wanted to pay big money to Jermon Bushrod, so the Saints decided they were going to immediately upgrade the position by taking Taron Armstead, from Arkansas Pine Bluff. Look, a guy that could end up developing into Drew Brees' blindside protector. He needed more time than he got last year. You know, the defense was terrible in New Orleans, so there was too much pressure on Brees. Then he didn't get nearly enough time, so he was making horrible decisions. It was just one problem after another after another. Picks like John Jenkins. You need a nose tackle in order to run the 3-4. All this talk about always having to have an outside linebacker that can rush the passer, that's important. But in order to run the 3-4, you have to have a space eater at nose tackle. You have to have it. If you do not, you cannot run the 3-4. I don't give a fuck who you are. You have to have that guy that can occupy 2 blockers. And that's what they got, in my opinion, in John Jenkins in the 3rd round. Hell, I look at a guy like Kenny Stills, the receiver they got in the 5th round. I don't like Oklahoma receivers very much and skill position players in general, but Stills in the 5th round is a guy that could potentially contribute down the road as a, as a type of slot receiver, a versatile weapon. This was a good, solid draft for the Saints. I give them a B grade on this. For the 5 picks that they had, I thought they did a pretty good job of filling some holes and also, reloading a bit for the future. Now, when talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is again another team that looks like they are like the Carolina Panthers, somebody that could be breaking through in 2013. The NFC is going to be a very interesting conference to watch next year, as you've got some teams that used to be good that could be declining. You also have some teams that look like they could be on the cusp, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not they take that next step or not. Like with the Carolina Panthers, in this case, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers under Greg Schiano. I have to say that the acquisition of Darrelle Revis was on 100% the right move for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You had to do it. No player in this draft had more value than Darrelle Revis. ACL, Schmacl, whatever the fuck. You're looking at upside. You're looking at what this player can do. When Darrelle Revis is healthy, he's either 1A or 1B, best shutdown corner in the NFL, depending on who you ask. There's no player of that caliber in this draft with the 13th overall pick. So immediately the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did themselves a world of good. And especially when you look at the type of contract they signed Darrelle Revis to. Basically no guaranteed money. Genius. Just absolutely genius. Now when you look at the second round, they did keep that pick. And they were still able to address their secondary again. You brought in Darrelle Revis, so why not get your guy that you seem to have been in love with the entire time? There was word at one point in time you're going to take him in round 1. You got Jonathan Banks from Mississippi State in round 2, a guy that would seem in the surface, to fit what Greg Schiano does on defense very, very well. I was a little surprised the Bucs took Mike Glennon in round 3. I really was, especially because of the fact they spent their first-round pick in a trade for Darrelle Revis. So now you've taken a guy in the 3rd round who probably isn't going to play much, if at all, as a rookie. That was curious to say the least. The picks in the 4th round of Akeem Spence and William Golston, these are 2 young linemen that could potentially come in and contribute as rookies and, really help improve that defense. When you look at Tampa Bay, they did a good job of beefing up that defense. They really did. Now, if they're trying to sit there and put some pressure on Josh Freeman to perform and say, this is it, it's your contract year, you need to put up or shut up, they probably could have done a little bit of a better job of surrounding him with weapons, maybe gotten him a slot receiver in this draft, or in particular focused on the tight end position, which is a gaping void in that offense. But in general, the trade for Darrelle Revis, giving up that first-round pick, had to be done by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just had to. Banks was a good draft choice. Mike Glennon in round 3, to me, is very good value. And guys like Spence and Golston could end up being contributors even as rookies in a sub-package. I give the Buccaneers a B- in this draft. Not bad. Nobody in this division really had any major failings. The Panthers were the least impressive of the 4 teams, but that's not necessarily saying they were terrible. To me, even though a lot of the focus is going to be on the NFC West and how they're the toughest division in football in 2013, I really think it could play out potentially that the NFC South could secretly be the toughest division, even more so than the NFC West in 2013.